Okay, well, good morning, or good afternoon, or even good night, depending on the time zone in which you are. On behalf of my colleagues and coordinators, Diana Mendez, Pedro Urquijo, Alfredo Pureco, Timothy Lorek, and Antonio Chamorro, I welcome you to the Interinstitutional Global Seminar on Green Revolution, an academic space supported by the Colegio Mexiquense, the Dr. José María Luis Mora, and the Environmental Geography Research Center of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Well, it's a pleasure to have you present today at the fifth session of this seminar, in which we are going to discuss the case of the Green Revolution in the Middle East in Asia. But well, before to give the floor to our moderator of today, I have to say that one of our speakers, Joshua Thiel, had to withdraw because personal issues. So, well, once I have said this, I give the floor to Perla Valero, the moderator of today's session. Well, Valero is a professor of the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. So thank you for being here. And well, go ahead, please, Professor Valero.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for your attendance to this, the fifth session of this international seminar on the Green Revolution on its 80th anniversary. I would like first to thank the organizing committee for this invitation and also to all the people who are following this broadcast. Today, we will have a presentation from Eleonora Guadagno on the Green Revolution in the Middle East. I'm going to present first Eleonora. Eleonora Guadagno, PhD in Geography, is currently a researcher at the University of Naples, L'Orientale. Her research is mainly related to social, environment, and risk migration policies. If this theme has been declined on the analysis of the deconstruction of the concept of environmental related mobility within the framework of her doctoral thesis, in parallel, she has dealt with the issues related to inland areas, coast, abandoned territories, and commons, as well as the relationship between traditional agricultural knowledge and environmental risk migration. It is within this analytical framework that the paper moves, the paper she's presenting today, which, starting from the analysis of the territorial implications of the application of a law aimed at the protection of historic and heroic vineyards, aims to decipher the possible implications, but also the limits and criticalities of such regulatory framework from a geographic perspective. She's going to be talking about the case of Iraq, and her presentation is titled The Green Revolution in Iraq, Features and Issues. And so please, Eleonora, when you're ready, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and really thank you for inviting me to participate in this international seminar, which has given us so much to reflect on so far. And even really thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in English, because if I can understand a bit Spanish, I couldn't be able to present my work in Spanish. And thank you also to be able to dialogue with Perla, and it will be a pleasure to discuss with all of you. Under the circumstances, since I am alone, please interrupt me if there is also a need for clarification at any time. Really, I will be happy to answer all your questions if my presentation is not clear or if you have any question about it. Actually, talking about agricultural policies of the past and their impacts on our present help us to understand how much also our action can contribute to improve or worsen socio health and environmental conditions in different contexts. So from this perspective, I move on today to focus on the policies that are under the framework of the Green Revolution have been carried out in Iraq since the late 50s. The country, as you can see from the slide, is located in Southeast Asia, and it is one of the least densely populated countries in Middle East. As you can see, it consists largely in lowland plains, and geologically it is relatively recent, underlain by rock of the Cretaceous and Eocene areas, mainly limestones, with band of salt and gypsum, that you know is very important form of mineral. On the lowland plains, the river is covered by fluvial deposit and alluvium. Iraq's two more important rivers, as you all know, are Tigris and Euphrates, which are the crucial regulators of the natural and social life of the population in Iraq since the born of humankind. While the Euphrates have no stable tributaries, the Tigris received several from Mount Zagros, which is the most important mountain in Iraq. The common delta of the two rivers, which is called Shat el Arab, is 185 kilometers long, and it is very deep. It is about 7 meters deep. The climate is subtropical, continental, and characterized by a large difference in temperature between winter and summer, day and night, and a general lack of rainfall is determined by low humidity. The population, as you can see, is about 40 million people, and it is concentrated in the main cities, where and you know that agriculture, as you can see from the graph, is the main source of economic growth. To analyze the impact of the Green Revolution in the area, I decided to start to consider the consequences of COVID on Iraq food security, as presented in the FAO report. As you can see, the food insecurity was caused by the collapsed demand in oil, which is related to the economic slowdown driven by the measures to contain the spread of the virus. Why I started with this event? Because despite the time that has elapsed, this episode reminds us that the policies driven in the past continue to have their effect today and still shapes the institution and the practices of agricultural science and technology. In fact, this problem of food security in Iraq in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic bring us back to the analysis of agriculture in Iraq and the socio-environmental impacts of the Green Revolution to, in fact, retrace its socio-agricultural history. Nowadays, in fact, rural to urban migration within the countries is widespread and threatens the social and economic stability. The demographic pressure on the land, combined with the need to produce more food from a limited and shrinking basic resource, like land and water, are forcing actually farmers to follow an exploitative production practices that maximize short-term returns and at the expense, I would say, of long-term sustainability, actually. Iraq, as you all know, is part of the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. It is there that 8,000 before Christ that mankind first domesticated wheat. Here, this is the place where agriculture was born. Once came under Roman supremacy in different way and at different times. This area were particularly exploited for its fertile soil, and this land was used to grow a huge quantity of grains, so much that Iraq was called the granary of Rome. The production was exported, in fact, to the capital of the empire to satisfy its million inhabitants. Paradoxically, we can say that today the same areas are semi-deserts and with an arid climate and scarcity of rainfall. The agrarian sector in Iraq witnessed a number of drastic measures during the last 50 years. And those includes land reform, cooperative and collective state farming, central planning, and private ownership. Most experts agree that until the 95-8 revolution, inequality in Iraq's land tenure landownership largely contribute to the low standard of living of the peasants because it was dominated by great landowners. From the time the economy and agriculture developing within the framework of planning, which consisted in different aspects, which started with the land reform, the big land reform in 1970. It was based on the accelerated economic and productive development, modern technology to agriculture. It was also related to the gene bank collection, where land races, mutants, and wild species were developed to support these breeding programs. Technological revolution for the modernization process of production, and the reform linked to the property asset, namely the reduction of the maximum size of individual holdings. Moreover, no compensation was paid for land expropriation, while land was redistributed to peasants free of charge from the beginning of 1975. We also assist to a big rural to urban migration, and the biggest impact of those reforms were, of course, the dams construction. The reform program jointly carried out as part of the Green Revolution and also with all the reform reinforced during the period of Saddam Hussein governorship had its key point within the construction of dams, irrigation expansion works through the drainage of marshes, and above all, the mechanization of agricultural. With, if you can see from the table, an exponential increase in the number of agricultural machines, but also in the using of fertilizers. Thus, the construction of the third river, namely the Kirkuk irrigation project, was also carried out, was also started, and the reclamation programs was carried out. In fact, there was an estimated irrigation potential of 5.5 million total hectares, 63% of which was in the Tigris Basin, 35% in the Euphrates Basin, and the remaining in the Shatt el Arab Basin, which is the core of the marshes, the plain between the river, the Tigris and the Euphrates. In the short term, this reform had relatively positive consequences in that they slightly increase the production of cereals and fruits, as you can see from the graph. But I would say that despite the investment and changes to the landscape and the land ownership, these reforms were not able to create wealth or at least ensure the welfare of the worker in the sector. Moreover, much of land was confiscated, and paradoxically, it worsened the condition of the peasant. It is particularly visible if we compare the data from the UN Economic Commission for Western Asia, as reported in Beaumont, where we can see the partial growth in production, mainly for wheat and barley, and a limited growth for rice and maize, but only for the early stages or the reform programs. As I have already said, all those reforms were also supported by a massive penetration of genetically modified seeds and the use of pesticides. Standards tied primarily to export and the presence of large corporation interest generated what is commonly called biopiracy, which is, of course, a negative impact on biodiversity, but also for the health of people and for food security, as well as for the economic sector, of course. In addition, investment in renewable program was not constant, and while in 1977 the agriculture received the $1.5 billion, in 1981 we can assist a reduced direct involvement in farming, resulting in low quality seed. Moreover, we have mercury poisoning. The mercury was used as antifungal for the wonder wheat, what is called wonder wheat, but of course it had a very important problem for people who were eating those wonder wheat. With infestation and pest attack, the reduction of farm efficiency, the abandon of the land, but also in consequence of a reduction of agricultural expense, a reduction of the food production, and a massive amount of import. Suffice it to say that the irrigation potential that reached in 1976 was reduced to 19% until 2000, when the agriculture accounted for only 5% in the country's GDP. Moreover, the Green Revolution, in addition to rebinding the dependence of countries in the Global South on industrialized countries and big corporations, had a negative impact, especially on the most vulnerable groups in Iraq, who had their primary source of livelihood taken away from them. In fact, their exposure to risk has increased, their level of unemployment and dependence of international aid. In fact, food sovereignty subsidies have turned into an irreversible path of food insecurity. This phenomenon has caused a massive migration to urban centers and a corresponding gradual abandonment of the countryside. And as we know, the abandonment of countryside is linked to an increased environmental risk. Thus, according to the data, not only the Green Revolution associated with the land unfriendly policies and foreign interest and multinational corporation interest have replaced the opportunity for local people. But the effect of those reforms had a nefarious impact on the environment, biodiversity, health, labor. And if we contextualize the analysis on the specific case of the Iraq, it can also be said that those reforms have created the basis for the destruction of an entire habitat. In fact, due to the drainage work and canalization resulting from the construction of the dams, the complex of the marsh area, as you can see in the map, no, you can see the Tigris and the Euphrates and all the Shatt el Arab plain. This is an area which is protected by the Ramsar Convention because it's a humid zone. Anyhow, though this area has suffered severe damage and the ecological process have been irremediably altered. The Hamar swamp have become dry land. The former permanent lakes of the central swamp, namely Al-Zikri, Al-Binni, etc., have dried up, leaving vast expanses of salt crust. Most of the transboundary lakes have been turned in a barren land, as you can see from the satellite photograph. Agricultural management policies that has led irreparable damages to the environment were also crossed with a ruthless policies of marginalization and extermination of the population. The population who habited this area is a Shiite minority, and they were the population who inhabited the plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates. The consequence was the destruction of a natural system and the abandonment of the area by the original population. Furthermore, the destruction of the natural habitat poses a serious threat to the area's wildlife population. Soil degradation in terms of salinization and erosion and desertification, of course. Moreover, military and industrial infrastructure has released heavy metals and other hazardous substances into the air, soil, and groundwater. In sum, we can say that the destruction of such fragile environment as the Tigris and Euphrates marshes meant the death sentence of this specific habitat. The population, in fact, suffered an attack on dual sources, the racial, political, and the environmental. On the one hand, racial policies against this minority have exacerbated environmental problems. On the other, agricultural policies to increase food production have caused irreparable damage to the environment and to the people who have been forced to flee from an environment that has become inhospitable and hostile. But since 2003, UNAM started a land rehabilitation program, reintroduction from some fauna species to redevelop the Mesopotamian area of an high cultural, natural, historical, and archaeological scenic interest. But we can say also that the fate of remaining marsh Arabs inside Iraq is still uncertain. In fact, although the program organized on behalf of UNEP, efforts are underway to repopulate their original living area. Agricultural policies and related reform implemented during the years of the Green Revolution, we can say that have caused damages to many of the natural ecosystem of the territories in which they have materialized. The Iraqi case is the representative example to understand how they not only caused the problem to the environment, but also compromised the lives of the indigenous population. The Green Revolution is often portrayed as an advent of scientific and technological modernity, which helped avert famine and recover for food deficit. But in reality, as demonstrated by this specific case, this meant the sustaining of power-knowledge relation in agricultural science and technology, supported as often by an hegemonic modernization paradigm. Thank you for your attention, and I am available for any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleonora, for your presentation. As she already said, we would like to remind the audience that you can share questions or comments for our speaker if you wish to do so. I don't know, I think we don't have one yet, but in the meantime, I would like to comment and ask a few questions to Eleonora, hoping that the audience would share some questions as well. First, I would like to ask Eleonora if you could clarify the role of some of the actors that are intervening in this process of the agricultural reform. Because you talked about the international organizations, the international aid, UNESCO, USAID, also the Iraqi government. But I was thinking, and I would like to ask you, is there any role also of other private actors like private companies, or what is the role that they are having in this very complicated process that you were presenting? Also, I know that in other papers you have talked about also of the concept of environmental migrants and environmental refugees. I don't know if you could elaborate a bit more on those concepts, because you were talking about these results of this process, that is the segregation, a phenomenon of segregation, and in other scientists have talked also about environmental racism. So maybe it has something to do also with this concept of environmental refugees and migrants. And finally, I don't know if is there an impact also in this process of the war. I don't know if that is something that you could mention or talk a little bit more about the invasion and war in Iraq, if that has something, some impact regarding these agricultural policies. And that would be the questions on my behalf, Eleonora.
Okay, first of all, I would say that private interest and multinational interest were the most important problem in all those reform, because as I said, there was the problem of the gene seed bank. Because all the reform under the behalf of the Green Revolution were started with OGM seeds. And the Iraq was one of the most important experimental field in OGM seeds. So this is the first problem. That's why they created in a laboratory the Wonder Weth, because it was considered a new kind of weth that was more efficient from the production point of view. So yes, very important role of foreign interest, multinational and corporation interest. Second question was about environmental refugee. Well, my opinion is that environmental refugee is not just a problem of environment and catastrophic event, but the idea that people are forced to flee because of environmental problem is always related to environmental policies, is always related to their vulnerability or their lack of capabilities. And all those aspects are social aspects, are political aspects, and the fact that we always talk about Anthropocene, about climate change, is a way also to deresponsabilize the government about all the environmental policies they could drive and they could address to people. So in the specific case of Iraq, I will say that, of course, apart from the problem linked to the basic resources like land and water for the people in the Iraqi marshland, the fact that they flee this area are of course related to the policies. So they are not only environmental refugee, but of course they are political refugee like all the other refugee. And the problem linked to the war, the first Iraqi war in 1990, 1991, are of course one of the main problems to the food security in this period. As I told you, the agricultural expense went down starting from the 80s, and it was accelerated by the military expense during the 90s. So there is a substitution, an important substitution from the agricultural expense to military expense that created or worsened the food insecurity of the population living in Iraq. So I don't know if I answered to all of your questions.
Yes, Eleonora, thank you. I think we have some other questions now. I'm going to read it to Eleonora. First, Dominic Glover, he asked, could you say something about who introduced the Green Revolution in the late 50s? That is, who promoted it and who funded it? Then we have also comment and question from Gabriela Soto. She says, thank you for your interesting talk. At several points, you mentioned that the damage done to these agricultural spaces was irreparable. Yet, if I understood the last image correctly, it seems that one of the lakes has gained water, or what I thought was water. So she asked, by irreparable, does this mean that these agricultural zones are now deserts? Deserts. And then we have another question from Jaime Ortega. He says, a very interesting presentation. The historiography on the Green Revolution has reflected little on these connections with urban spaces. What elements do you identify from the case of Iraq to begin to extend this line of work? For now, we have these three questions. I don't know if anybody else would like to also to share a question, but in the meantime, we will hear Eleanor.
Okay, just a question for Dominic. Who introduced the Green Revolution in Iraq or in general? Because if you're thinking in general, okay, it was as you know, a large policy of technology transfer, and after the World War II until I will say the late 80s of the beginning of the 90s, no, it was financed by Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and under the behalf of FAO. In Iraq, the problem was that you have the mix between the Green Revolution funds and all the reform, the planning reform under the Hussein governorship. So the mix of the two aspects, I think, was one of the caused really important damages on the food security in the country. The second question, if I answer to the first one, was about the problem linked to the irreparable damages to the area of the marshes. I would say that, of course, UNEP program since 2003 are starting to bring wildlife species, flora and fauna. But as you know, once you have created a problem in the wildlife and the biodiversity equilibrium, it is very difficult to restore it. Also because this habitat was the primary source of life of this population that is not leaving this area anymore, or very little. So it will be very, very difficult, and we don't know, with all the impact of climate change, if it will be possible to restore the ancient ecosystem. So it is very complicated in this sense. The third question is about the urban spaces. The problem is that all the massive migration from the rural areas to the urban center was in a sort accelerated by the war, by this climate and environmental pressure in the rural areas. And of course, all those aspects create an unbalanced environment between the urban and rural areas. So the most pressure in the cities, I would say, it is very complicated to manage, and we saw it in the first Iraqi war, in the second war, and also in the conflict that in the current days Iraq is experiencing. So I don't know, but I haven't worked on urban areas in Iraq, so I have just a rural to urban perspective. The last question was about ecological justice. Yes, and it joins also the question of Perla, the first question of Perla. The ecological justice is very complicated in this specific case. Also because the refugee from this area, or the migrants, because in any case, they didn't cross the border of Iraq, so they are internal displaced or internal migrants. Actually, this ecological aspect should be otherwise stressed, because it represents the key point, the connection point between the ecological policies, the racial policies. And so I think that the fact that the recognition of the two aspects should be enhanced to protect those people, which are in the fact marginalized, as I said. So they suffer from like two different marginalization, ecological and racial. And this example represents how environmental policies matters in the ecological justice, and how we cannot connect, we can not only represent the environmental migrants, the climate migrants, as the victim of the climate change, of the environmental degradation, but they are political victim. They are all their migration are the effect of perverse ecological, racial policies. I can read their question, Perla.
Yes, please, Eleonora.
Okay, John says, did the regime of same benefit? Okay. The question of John Florian is about the regime of Hussein. Yes, actually the fact that the governorship and the member of the government were Sunnis, of course, created a very important difference in benefit from the Green Revolution, like other policies, like oil found and all the economic aspect in Iraq. And the fact that this minority of the Marsh Arab were Shiites, of course, it is another aspect that should be added to consider their marginalization, and to consider the fact that the rural population have been completely are not considered in the spread of the international aid. And this is one of the examples to understand how the trickle-down effect, that is one of the rhetoric of the development models during the 50s and the 60s, didn't work at all. I don't know. Okay. Lots of questions.
Thank you. Eleonora, we
Yes.
would like to thank also all the people who are sharing questions and comments. I would like to ask a final question, Eleonora, because already somebody was asking about the specificity in the Iraqi case of class and ethnic groups. But I would like to ask you also in this perspective of how this process has affected in very particular forms certain ethnic groups and certain class groups. Could you talk a little bit about the perspective of gender in this process? Because I think in some of the papers that you share with us, you mentioned something, but I don't recall it exactly what it is. But maybe it would be also very interesting to think not just in class and ethnicity, but also in gender. So if you could elaborate on it, please.
Yes. You have to consider that the problem, of course, of gender issues are related with the enhancing of vulnerability, and because in rural context, women are often charged to provide the basic aspect of the life, like collecting water or just the sufficiency agriculture. So also in Iraq, all the data from FAO, but also the statistics that you can find in Beaumont, which is one of the first researcher which investigated about Iraq agricultural policies during the 60s and the 70s, you can see that the self-sufficiency agriculture and the role of the women was worsened by all the reform. We can say that there is a polyhedric discrimination. You cannot separate class, gender, and ethnicity. And we can say that the women suffer from the three aspects of the vulnerability. So there is an increased vulnerability, and in the same sense, a lack of resilience from all those policies. But it's not peculiar to this case. You have a lot of academic literature about gender issue in, for example, environmental migration in Bangladesh or in India nowadays. Because women are, as I already said, are often in charge of really the problem related to the basic need in the local communities. So they are the most vulnerable group within the most vulnerable community.
Thank you, Eleonora. And we're going to be listening now to Nezahualcóyotl Gutiérrez, who is also going to comment. So please.
Well, it's a little question. It's about the process of revolution, but thinking, for example, in the erosion of indigenous land masses or varieties, for example, in the case of wheat. Now in the process, if in the process of the revolution in Iraq, you can see this erosion in the indigenous land masses, and if you can see also if this erosion happened, an impact in the diets of the people, especially in the lower income people.
Okay, I have no specific data on the changing diet regime, but as I show you in the first part of my presentation, the FAO report connect the impact of this current food insecurity with all the policies that have been made during the 60s and the 70s. So, of course, food insecurity create, I would say, a depletion in the diet varieties, most of all in the most vulnerable group, and the problem linked with the idea of the Green Revolution to diversify the species of and to improve the efficiency of the different crop totally failed. And we said we have seen it at the end of the 80s when all the agricultural farms were stopped because of the war, and we can see it now, where since Iraq import actually everything, import every alimentary, every aliment or every good. There is a very important problem in food scarcity. Not only food security, but really food scarcity. And of course, this is very important in urban areas, as I told you, but also in the rural areas, which are experiencing climate change, in addition to all environmental degradation.
Thank you, Eleonora.
And it's very paradox because, as I told you, Iraq was considered the main source of the granary of Rome, the main source, a very fertile place. So it's very, it's like shocking, yeah.
Thank you, Eleonora. And Diana Mendes also is going to use this space, please.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation, Eleonora. My question is related with your last comment. I would like to know your opinion on how the right to healthy food is seen from this migratory process. Is it considered an element of environmental justice? I ask this, for example, about the opportunity to have access from different kind of foods more than agricultural products.
Yes, if I understand, you are asking about environmental justice and the problem which are related also to the health of those people and food security for those people. As I told you, not only the problem was related to the food safety, but food security, sorry, but also to food safety. During the Green Revolution period, the spread use of OGM and the use, for example, of mercury created a lot of problem in health condition of the peasant who were working on those areas. And also the fact that during that time, the military and the industrial infrastructure released lots of materials in the soil. It created a very important problem to groundwater and so again to the health of the people working on those areas and to rural population overall. So of course, problem food security, food safety and racial policies really can be framed under the idea of environmental injustice, as you said. Yes.
Thank you, Eleonora. I think that's all the comments and questions we have. And before closing this fifth session, I feel obliged to ask you one last question, Eleonora, on the perspectives of change, of the perspectives of new scenarios in Iraq. And so please, if you like to comment a final comment.
Okay, it's not very an easy question because I am not I'm not very good in international relation, or it's not my field of competence. So I can just have an environmental perspective because yes, this specific area is an area of real geostrategic interest, and I am not able to really have a deep analysis on it. Also because you have the number of ethnic groups, number of foreign interest, number of really interest in mineral, also because all the raw materials that Iraq has. So I cannot enter in the geostrategic consideration right now. I can only say that I hope that the UNEP restoration program will work. I hope that people who inhabited the marshes would have one day the possibility to come back in their original habitat. And I hope that climate change will not worsen the general condition, but I am not very confident about it. We will see, and I hope during my life I will see a change, but I don't know really.
Right.
I'm sorry, can be able to answer differently.
Well, thank you, Eleonora, very much for your presentation and for your answers and comments. And we also like to thank everyone who followed this broadcast, for all the people who comment and launch questions. And with this note, we're going to close this 5th session. And you can find the broadcast in the El Colegio Mexiquense's YouTube page. And thank you, everybody, and have a nice day.